Dear friends, as part of this ongoing conference on sustainability of built environment, please allow me to share my screen. The paper I'm going to present is Evolution, Growth and Government Interventions for Upgradation of AHATA's Impact. I'm architect Seema Kharbanda, Associate Professor at TPT Institute of Technology, School of Architecture and Planning, Greater Noida. As we all are aware, Kanpur is an industrial city which is located in North India. And it was set up by the British when they set up their army camps over there. And it gradually developed into an industrial city with the growth of textile mills and woolen mills such as Lang and Lee, JK, Elgin mills, and the migrant industrial workers which lived in the nearby areas came and settled here to start working in these industries. So most of the migrant industrial laborers, they tried to find accommodation near the industrial units because commuting was a problem in those days. So this gradually started out as renting out of land by the landlords over there in the form of small tenements, which gradually led to the development of squatters and congested areas because when more and more migrant population came over there, so the slum-like conditions were developed with deficiencies in basic services and which were extremely dirty areas and unpleasant. Now the point which comes to our mind is what is the difference between AHATA and slums? Since the facilities or the looks, they look the same. But the basic point of difference is the AHATAs are built on private land, and whereas the slums are squatters on the government land, or along railway lines or along the nalas. Whereas AHATAs exist on private land, and these were built by the landlords and the industry owners, and the basic purpose was to provide accommodation to the migrant labor. And generally the AHATAs were named after the name of its owners, such as Manju ka AHATA, FAZAL HUSSAIN ka AHATA. So gradually there was a great transformation in the AHATAs in the form of congested areas, lack of water, lack of sewerage conditions. There was no garbage collection facilities. So gradually the AHATAs were transformed into very dirty areas to stay. This gave rise to our research questions like, presently is there a growing demand still for housing which is resulting in an unplanned way of development of these AHATAs? Or what are the ongoing changes in the land use and the neighborhood areas of these AHATAs? What is the impact of the government interventions on the infrastructure over there? And how can we make these AHATAs more sustainable? What are the impact of the interventions which have been carried out by the private sector? Or how can we reduce the gap between the demand side in the AHATA and supply side from the local body in the terms of facilities? So for that, I have conducted a study of the physical characteristics of AHATAs, and I have tried to identify the various interventions that are taken up by the public and the private sector for development in these AHATAs. And then I have analyzed the effects of the intervention in the study areas and then suggested steps which could be taken up for a way forward for the sustainable development in these AHATAs. So the study is limited to the identify AHATAs which are lying within the municipal boundary of Kanpur Nagar, which have been taken up for development through any government scheme or through interventions by the private developers. So if we take an overview of the various planning and legislative measures, the first is the National Slum Development Program in 1996, wherein the role of the government sector was in the form of upgradation of AHATAs, in situ development by laying of paver streets or electrical poles or hand pumps or garbage collection points. This was just basic minimum development was done for the slums. And then we came to the Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewal Mission in 2005 and the Rajiv Awas Yojana wherein there was an affordable housing in partnership for the dwellers. So the first AHATA which was taken up was the FAZAL HUSSAIN ka AHATA. In this, we see that there is a highly organic development of the AHATA, and there are mostly kacha houses of size around 6 feet by 8 feet, and they hardly have any proper ventilation. There's no proper water supply. There's just a single municipal tap over here, which leads to long lines for collection of water, there's no proper garbage disposal system, which leads to stinking and garbage heaps. The reason for why no development was carried out was, as responded by the dwellers over there, was that the AHATA was donated to the Waqf board. And so the residents have stopped paying any rents. So there's a need to identify the such AHATAs where there's no clear ownership of status throughout the city and towards the betterment of the dwellers. The second study area was the NOOR MOHAMMAD AHATA, where modifications were done under the National Slum Development Program. The streets were widened and paved as far as possible. Provision of electrical poles was made for lighting. Hand pumps were set up at strategic location and open drains were created along the streets. And dustbins were placed for garbage collection. But what we find over here now, as per a discussion with the residents, is that people are unwilling to invest here because they don't have any tenure rights to the properties. And there's lack of proper development controls, which leading to encroachments or changing in land use. And there is no maintenance of the facilities which have been provided. So they are lying in a very bad state. The third study area is MATHIYA AHATA, and this was taken up due to pressure of the local political leaders over there by KDA. In this, there was a drainage and the sewerage responsibility was done by the KDA in return for nominal betterment charges. And in this AHATA, the land was made available at concessional rate to the prospective builder, who developed a part of land as housing for the AHATA dwellers, and the rest of the area was available for him to sell off at as per his wishes. And there were formation of cooperatives, and the units to the dwellers were given at a subsidized price. But the condition over here is that the space which was made available to the beneficiaries was very less. Like a family of 4 or a family of 10, they all got the same amount of unit space when they were allotted these units. And these units were provided to them without proper finishes, due to which they had to incur costs in the finishing the whole area. Then the quality of construction was quite substandard, as we see in these photographs. And there's a investment opportunity to these dwellers because of the higher selling cost, due to which this is not a very successful attempt by the government. Then the last study area which is taken up is CHANDU BABU AHATA, which was a large chunk of land which was owned by the private developers. So he subdivided it into around 5 to 10 plots, and the proper internal development charges and external development charges were paid to the KDA. And since this was located in the central heart of Kanpur with a very posh residential area, the land cost was very high, and the residences are so owned by the elite business class. And we see a very good quality of development here. The subdivision approvals have been properly done by KDA after receiving the EDC and the IDC. And there was a formation of gated space communities and open areas. So we have studied 4 different types of AHATAs over here. And as a conclusion, for sustainable growth, what I would suggest is, for administrative sustainability, we should try to give no free housing, because then the people do not value the units. Then there should be scale in situ development so that the residents are not forced to shift to some new place and then search for new means of livelihood. There should be responsibility sharing through better quality of housing, faster construction, and enhanced beneficiary identification. There should be an involvement of the private sector and using innovative technologies. For the financial sustainability, I would suggest granting leasehold rights to the households and with innovative lending mechanisms, and new methods are required to recognize informal proof of income. There's a recent approach to rental housing, which is a very good alternative for them. Then we have to increase the role of the community developers and the NGOs and try to provide a better education to the children of the slum dwellers. As for the environmental sustainability, we should try for a decentralization of the infrastructure, sanitation, and the wastewater management. We can go in for the provision of subsidized solar power installations on the unused rooftops of these spaces of these housing. Then the maintenance of facilities should be properly done by the municipal or the private sector with nominal charges. For the cultural sustainability is very important, so we should provide space for community gathering, and even in vertical planning. The informal settlements should be well planned with shopping, because that is a very important requisite of the housing and multi-utility spaces to be considered for economic opportunities and interaction areas. So we find that all these actions will greatly help to have a sustainable development. So we need to have effective paths to be worked out with the active involvement of the government, the community, NGOs, and selfless political will to pave the way forward. Thank you for a patient hearing.